The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone corridors of Kensington. Palace as Officer James Mitchell took his position outside the children's wing. He had been a member of the Royal Protection Unit for nearly 8 years, and in that time he had seen many things, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. James was a man of discipline and composure. His military background had taught him to remain calm under pressure, to keep his emotions locked away behind a professional facade. Standing at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a stern expression, he looked every bit the part of a royal guard. His colleagues often joked that he was made of stone, never showing a crack in his armor. The palace was quieter than usual that morning. The Prince and Princess of Wales had left early for an engagement in Scotland, leaving their 3 children in the care of their trusted nanny and the palace staff. Young Prince George was at school, and Princess Charlotte was attending a ballet lesson in the West Wing. That left Prince Louis, the youngest of the 3. Playing in the nursery under watchful eyes, Louis was known among the staff as the most spirited of the Cambridge children. At 5 years old, he had an infectious laugh and boundless energy that could light up any room. He was curious about everything, always asking questions and exploring every corner of the palace he could reach. The guards had a special fondness for him, though they would never admit it publicly. Around mid-morning, James heard quick footsteps approaching from inside the nursery. The heavy oak door creaked open, and there stood Prince Louis, his small face flushed and his eyes wide with an emotion James couldn't quite place. The boy was wearing his favorite blue sweater, the one with a little lion embroidered on the chest, and his hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running. "Officer Mitchell," Louis said, his voice smaller than usual. The child normally called him by silly nicknames or simply the tall guard, so the use of his proper title caught James off guard. "Yes, Your Royal Highness," James replied, maintaining his professional stance, but softening his tone slightly. He had children of his own at home, and something about the boy's demeanor triggered his paternal instincts. Louis glanced back over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure no one was listening, then stepped closer to James. "Can I tell you something? A secret?" James felt a slight unease. In his training, he had been taught that any unusual behavior from the royal children should be noted and reported. But he also knew that sometimes children just needed someone to talk to, especially when their parents were away. "Of course, sir. You can tell me anything," James said, crouching down to be at eye level with the young prince. This small gesture, breaking from his rigid posture, was something he rarely did. Louis took a deep breath, his small hands fidgeting with the hem of his sweater. "I'm scared," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet hallway. James felt his heart constrict. In all his years of service, he had never heard such raw vulnerability from any of the royal children. They were raised to be brave, to show strength even in difficult situations. For Louis to admit fear was significant. "Scared of what?" James asked gently, resisting the urge to place a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. Professional boundaries still mattered, even in moments like these. Louis looked up at him with those big, innocent eyes. "Of him," he said simply. "Of whom, Your Highness?" James pressed, his professional instincts now fully alert. If someone had threatened or frightened the child, it was his duty to know immediately. The boy's next words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them in for a long time. "Tom Parker Bowles, Camilla's son. He came to visit last week with his mom, and he said things that made me feel funny inside. Not good funny. Scary funny." James felt his chest tighten. Tom Parker Bowles was Queen Camilla's son from her first marriage, a well-known food critic and television personality. He was in his late 40s, a grown man who should have no reason to frighten a 5-year-old child. Yet here was Prince Louis, visibly distressed at the mere mention of his name. "What kind of things did he say?" James asked, keeping his voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. Louis bit his lower lip, a gesture James recognized from his own daughter when she was trying not to cry. "He told me that if I wasn't a good boy, if I ever did anything to embarrass the family, there would be consequences." He said it with a smile, but his eyes were cold, like ice. "He said his mom is the queen now, and that means he has power too." Power to make sure little princes learn their place. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. James felt something crack inside his chest, that carefully constructed wall of professional detachment beginning to crumble. This was not just palace gossip or childish imagination. The specificity of Louis's account, the genuine fear in his voice, the way he had been carrying this burden alone, it all pointed to something real and deeply troubling. "Did you tell your parents about this?" James asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Louis shook his head quickly. "Mummy and Daddy were so busy that day. There were so many people visiting, and everyone was talking about important things. I tried to stay close to Mummy, but she had to go to another room for meetings. And then I thought maybe I was being silly. Maybe I misunderstood. Tom is a grown-up, and grown-ups don't say mean things to children, right?" The innocence of that question nearly broke James's composure entirely. Here was a child trying to rationalize away his own valid feelings, trying to convince himself that the fear he felt wasn't real because it didn't fit with what he had been taught about how adults should behave. "Your feelings are not silly," James said firmly, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "If someone made you feel scared or uncomfortable, that matters. It always matters." Louis's eyes began to well up with tears. "But he's going to be at the Christmas gathering. Nanny told me this morning. All the family will be together at Sandringham, and he'll be there. I don't want to go. I don't want to see him again." James stood up slowly, his mind racing. He needed to report this immediately to his superiors, but he also needed to make sure Louis felt safe and heard in this moment. The boy had trusted him with something deeply personal, and that trust could not be betrayed. "Your Royal Highness," James said, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer fully suppress, "I want you to know that you are safe. It is my job, is all of our jobs here to make sure you are safe and happy. What you have told me is very important, and I promise you that we will make sure you are protected." A single tear rolled down Louis's cheek. Promise? That word, so simple and yet so heavy with hope, was what finally did it. James felt his own eyes begin to burn with tears he hadn't shed in years. Here was a small child, a member of one of the most famous families in the world, feeling frightened and alone despite being surrounded by dozens of staff and security. The weight of that reality, the failure it represented, crashed over James like a wave. "I promise," he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly. Louis stepped forward and, in a gesture that surprised them both, wrapped his small arms around James's leg in a brief hug before quickly pulling away and running back into the nursery. The door closed with a soft click, leaving James standing alone in the corridor. For several long moments, James remained frozen in place. Then, slowly, he felt a warm tear escape and roll down his cheek. His hands were shaking slightly, and he realized that his carefully maintained composure was completely shattered. In 8 years of service, he had faced protesters, suspicious packages, and even a security breach that required him to physically shield Princess Charlotte from a drone. He had remained calm and professional through it all. But this was different. This was a child's innocence being violated by someone who should have known better. Someone who used their connection to power to intimidate the most vulnerable. And James had not been there to prevent it. None of them had known. He pulled out his radio with trembling hands, knowing that what he was about to report would set off a chain of events that would ripple through the palace and possibly beyond. But before he made that call, he allowed himself one more moment to simply feel the weight of what had just happened. James Mitchell, the guard who never showed emotion, stood in that quiet corridor with tears streaming down his face, mourning the loss of a little boy's sense of safety and vowing that he would do everything in his power to restore it. The emergency meeting was called within an hour of James's report. He found himself sitting in a wood-paneled conference room deep within Kensington Palace, surrounded by people whose titles and responsibilities far exceeded his own. The head of royal protection, Sir Anthony Blackwood, sat at the head of the table, his expression grave. Beside him was Lady Catherine Pemberton, the senior aide to the Prince and Princess of Wales, and Dr. Sarah Chen, child psychologist who was occasionally consulted on matters involving the young royals. James, had composed himself by this point, wiping away the evidence of his emotional breakdown and returning to his professional demeanor, but inside he still felt shaken. He had replayed the conversation with Prince Louis 100 times in his mind during the past hour, analyzing every word, every expression on the child's face. "Officer Mitchell," Sir Anthony began, his voice measured and serious, "please walk us through exactly what Prince Louis said to you this morning. Leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." James cleared his throat and recounted the entire encounter. From the moment Louis had opened the nursery door to his final promise to the frightened child. As he spoke, he watched the faces around the table grow increasingly concerned. Lady Pemberton's hand moved to her mouth at one point, and Dr. Chen began taking rapid notes on her tablet. When he finished, the room fell silent for a long moment. Finally, Lady Pemberton spoke, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Tom Parker Bowles was here last Tuesday with Queen Camilla for afternoon tea. It was meant to be a casual family visit. There were approximately 20 people present in various parts of the palace throughout the afternoon. How did no one witness this interaction?" Sir Anthony pulled up a schedule on his tablet. According to the security logs, Prince Louis was in the drawing room with several adults for most of the visit. However, there was a 15-minute window when the nanny took Princess Charlotte to the restroom, and Prince George was engaged in conversation with his father in another area. During that time, the security cameras show Louis standing near the refreshment table and Tom Parker Bowles approaching him. They appear to have a brief conversation before Queen Camilla calls Tom away. "Can we hear the audio?" Dr. Chen asked. Sir Anthony shook his head. "The drawing room doesn't have audio surveillance, privacy protocols for the royal family. We have visual confirmation of the interaction, but no way to verify the exact words that were spoken." James felt a surge of frustration. Here was proof that something had happened, but no concrete evidence of what had been said. Would anyone believe a 5-year-old child's account against that of a respected food critic and the Queen's son? As if reading his thoughts, Dr. Chen set down her pen and looked directly at James. "Officer Mitchell, in your professional opinion, was Prince Louis telling the truth?" Without question, James replied immediately. "I've been around children my entire adult life, including my own. I know what genuine fear looks like." Prince Louis was not making this up or exaggerating. He was terrified, and he had been carrying that fear for a week, trying to convince himself it wasn't real. When he finally told me, it was because he learned Tom Parker Bowles would be at the Christmas gathering. That's a specific, credible concern, not a fabricated story. Dr. Chen nodded. "I agree with Officer Mitchell's assessment. Children of Prince Louis's age can certainly have vivid imaginations, but the details he provided, the cold eyes, the specific mention of consequences and learning his place, the connection to Queen Camilla's new position of power, these are not typical childhood fantasies. These are real concerns expressed by a child who has been intimidated by an adult." Lady Pemberton stood up and began pacing, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "This is an extremely delicate situation. Tom Parker Bowles is Queen Camilla's son. Any accusation against him becomes, by extension, a matter that involves the Queen herself. We cannot simply march up to Queen Camilla and tell her that her son has been accused of threatening Prince Louis without absolute proof. But we cannot ignore this either," Sir Anthony countered. "Our primary duty is to the safety and well-being of the Wales children. If Prince Louis feels threatened by Tom Parker Bowles, then we have an obligation to address that threat regardless of who it implicates." James listened to this exchange with growing concern. He could see the political calculations happening in real time, the weighing of duty against diplomacy. But all he could think about was the little boy who had trusted him with his fear, who had asked for a promise that he would be kept safe. "What about Prince Louis right now?" James interjected, drawing surprised looks from the others. It was not typical for someone of his rank to speak up in such meetings, but he no longer cared about protocol. He's frightened. He thinks he has to face this man again at Christmas. "What are we telling him?" Dr. Chen gave him an approving look. "Officer Mitchell raises an excellent point. Our immediate concern must be Prince Louis's sense of security. He has taken the brave step of speaking up about something that frightened him. How we respond now will shape not only his current well-being, but also his willingness to report concerns in the future. I recommend," Dr. Chen continued, that we first speak with the Prince and Princess of Wales immediately upon their return from Scotland this evening. They need to be informed of what their son reported and given the opportunity to speak with him directly. Then, we need to ensure that Prince Louis knows that his concerns are being taken seriously, and that measures are being put in place to protect him. And what measures are those? Lady Pemberton asked. We can hardly ban the Queen's son from Christmas celebrations without creating a massive family rift. Sir Anthony tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. You can control the environment. If Tom Parker Bowles attends Sandringham for Christmas, we can ensure that he is never alone with any of the children. We increase our protective presence in any rooms where the children are present. We create a buffer. It's a band-aid solution. James said again, speaking before he could stop himself. Prince Louis will still have to see him. Still have to be in the same room with someone who made him feel small and powerless. That's not safety. That's just managed fear. The room fell silent again. James expected to be reprimanded for his outburst, but instead, Sir Anthony nodded slowly. You're right, Officer Mitchell. But until we can have a frank conversation with the parties involved, managed fear is the best we can offer. The reality is that we are dealing with family dynamics that extend far beyond our security protocols. Dr. Chen leaned forward. There's another consideration here. Tom Parker Bowles' comment about his mother being Queen and having power, that suggests he may be using his family connection to assert dominance or authority. This could be an isolated incident, or it could be part of a pattern of behavior. We need to investigate whether there have been other instances where he has acted inappropriately with children or staff. Lady Pemberton returned to her seat, her expression troubled. I'll discreetly inquire among the household staff. Have been other incidents? People may have been afraid to speak up, given his relationship to the Queen. Over the next 2 hours, the group developed an action plan. The Prince and Princess of Wales would be briefed immediately upon their return. A careful diplomatic conversation would be arranged with Queen Camilla, framed not as an accusation, but as a concern about her son's interaction with young Louis. Additional security protocols would be implemented for any future gatherings where Tom Parker Bowles was present, and James Mitchell would be assigned as Prince Louis's primary security detail for the foreseeable future, given the trust the boy had placed in him. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, Dr. Chen approached James. You did the right thing today, Officer Mitchell. Not just in reporting what Prince Louis told you, but in showing emotion about it. Too often we try to maintain such professional distance that we forget we're dealing with real human beings, with real feelings. That little boy needed to know that someone cared about what happened to him. You gave him that. James felt a lump form in his throat again. I have a daughter around his age. If someone spoke to her the way Tom Parker Bowles spoke to Prince Louis, I would want someone to care. I would want someone to fight for her. Then fight for him, Dr. Chen said simply. Because he needs someone in his corner right now. As James walked back to his post outside the nursery, he thought about what fighting for Prince Louis might actually mean. It could mean going against powerful people, disrupting family harmony, possibly even risking his career if the palace decided that the matter was too politically sensitive to pursue aggressively. But when he passed by the nursery window and caught a glimpse of Louis playing with building blocks, small face still showing traces of the worry James had seen that morning, the decision became crystal clear. Some things were more important than politics or careers. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. That evening, when the Prince and Princess of Wales returned to Kensington Palace, James was called to give his account directly to them. He had never spoken to them at such length before, and he could see the pain and anger flash across their faces as he described their son's fear. The princess's eyes filled with tears that she didn't bother to hide, and the prince's jaw clenched so tightly that James could see a muscle twitching in his cheek. Thank you for telling us, Officer Mitchell, the princess said when he finished. Thank you for listening to Louis and for taking him seriously. We will handle this. Our son will not be made to feel afraid in his own family. The prince nodded, his voice tight with controlled fury. And Officer Mitchell, you were right to become emotional about this. Any decent human being would. Don't ever apologize for caring about the children in your protection. As James left their private chambers and returned to his duties, he felt a small measure of relief. Prince Louis's parents knew now. They would advocate for their son with all the power and influence they possessed. The battle was not over, but at least Louis was no longer fighting it alone. The next morning brought unexpected developments. James arrived for his shift to find the palace in a state of quiet tension. Staff members whispered in corners, and there was an unusual number of senior officials moving through the corridors with grim expressions. Something significant had happened overnight. Lady Pemberton found James in the security office and pulled him aside. "We need to talk. Somewhere private." They ended up in a small conference room, where she closed the door firmly before speaking. "After you left last night, the Prince and Princess of Wales had a lengthy video call with King Charles. Given the sensitive nature of the accusation against Queen Camilla's son, they felt it necessary to inform the king directly before taking any further action." James waited. Sensing there was more to come, the king was deeply troubled by what he heard. Lady Pemberton continued, "But more significantly, when he mentioned the incident to Queen Camilla in private, she did not seem entirely surprised. Apparently, there have been other situations over the years where Tom Parker Bowles has shown poor judgment around children. Nothing criminal, mind you, but moments where his attempts at humor or discipline have crossed lines. Queen Camilla had dismissed these as her son simply being awkward or misunderstood, not realizing the impact of his words. So she knew he could be inappropriate with children. And she still brought him to the palace for a family gathering where he would interact with Prince Louis. James couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Lady Pemberton sighed. In fairness to Her Majesty, I don't think she saw it as a significant risk. Tom is her son, and mothers often have blind spots when it comes to their children's flaws. But when confronted with Prince Louis's specific account and the fear it had instilled in the child, she apparently became quite distressed. According to the king, she wept and kept saying she had never meant for any of the children to feel frightened. James processed this information, trying to reconcile the image of a remorseful queen with the reality of a traumatized 5-year-old boy. What happens now? Queen Camilla has requested a meeting with the Prince and Princess of Wales to apologize personally and to discuss Tom's future involvement in family gatherings. She has also agreed that Tom will not attend the Christmas celebrations at Sandringham. She plans to speak with him herself about his behavior and make it clear that such conduct is unacceptable. It should have felt like a victory, but James found himself troubled by the solution. And Prince Louis? Does he know that he won't have to see Tom Parker Bowles at Christmas? The princess is planning to speak with him this afternoon. Once she returns from her morning engagement, Dr. Chen will be present to help frame the UHF conversation in an age-appropriate way. Lady Pemberton paused, studying James's face. "You don't seem satisfied with this resolution."
Ow.
James chose his words carefully. "With respect, ma'am, I'm glad that immediate steps are being taken to protect Prince Louis from future encounters with Tom Parker Bowles. But I'm concerned about the larger message being sent. A grown man intimidated a 5-year-old child using his connection to power to make that child feel small and afraid. If the only consequence is that he doesn't get invited to Christmas dinner, what does that teach Prince Louis about speaking up? What does it teach Tom Parker Bowles about accountability?" Lady Pemberton's expression softened. "You're not wrong, Officer Mitchell, but we're dealing with a complex web of family relationships and public image considerations. Tom Parker Bowles is not a member of the royal family, technically, but he is the Queen's son. Any harsh public action against him would create a scandal that would consume media attention for months. Is that really in Prince Louis's best interest?" "Maybe it is," James replied quietly. "Maybe Prince Louis needs to see that when someone hurts him, there are real consequences, not just quiet diplomatic solutions behind closed doors. Maybe he needs to know that his fear matters more than protecting the reputation of the person who caused it." Before Lady Pemberton could respond, James's radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised. Media presence detected at the palace gates. Multiple news vans arriving. Source of tip, unknown." Lady Pemberton's eyes widened. No, this wasn't supposed to leak. We've been so careful to keep this internal." She rushed to the window overlooking the front gates, where James could see the growing cluster of reporters and cameras. Someone had told the press about Prince Louis's accusation. and now the very scandal everyone had been trying to avoid was about to explode into public view. The rest of the day descended into controlled chaos. The palace's communications team worked frantically to develop a statement that would address the situation without providing too many details. The king's private secretary was in constant contact with the Prince and Princess of Wales, coordinating their response. And through it all, James maintained his post outside the children's wing, determined that whatever media storm was brewing outside, the children would remain shielded from it inside. Prince Louis emerged from his room around lunchtime, accompanied by his nanny. The boy looked confused by the heightened security presence and the tense atmosphere among the usually calm staff members. When he spotted James, his face brightened slightly. "Officer Mitchell, why is everyone acting so strange today?" Louis asked, with the direct honesty of childhood. James crouched down to the boy's level, a gesture that had become more natural to him since their conversation the previous day. "There are some reporters outside who want to talk about palace matters, but you don't need to worry about that. You're safe in here." Louis's expression grew serious. "Is it because of what I told you? About Tom?" The nanny looked startled, clearly unaware of what the child was referring to, but James kept his focus on Louis. "Your parents are handling everything, Your Royal Highness. You did exactly the right thing by telling me how you felt. You were very brave. But I didn't want everyone to know," Louis said, his voice small and worried. "I just wanted to feel safe again. Now everyone's upset, and it's my fault." James felt his heart break a little at the guilt he heard in the child's voice. This was exactly what he had feared that prince. Louis would internalize the chaos and blame himself for the disruption his honesty had caused. "Louis," James said firmly, using the boy's name without the formal title, "listen to me carefully. None of this is your fault. When someone makes you feel scared or uncomfortable, telling a trusted adult is always the right choice. Always. What happens after that is not your responsibility. The adults are supposed to fix the problem, not make you feel bad for reporting it." The nanny placed a gentle hand on Louis's shoulder. "Officer Mitchell is absolutely right, dear. Come on now, let's get you some lunch. Cook made your favorite pasta." As they walked away, James heard Louis ask in a small voice, "Will Tom be angry with me now?" The question lingered in the air even after they had disappeared around the corner. A painful reminder of how this situation had transformed from a simple plea for help into something much larger and more complicated. By mid-afternoon, the palace had released a brief statement confirming that there had been an incident involving a family member and one of the Wales children, that the matter had been addressed internally, and that the family requested privacy during this time. The statement was deliberately vague, providing no names and no specific details, but it did little to satisfy the ravenous appetite of the press. Speculation ran wild on social media and news programs. Some outlets accused the palace of covering up something serious. Others defended the family's right to handle private matters privately. Everyone had an opinion, but very few had actual facts. Queen Camilla's meeting with the Prince and Princess of Wales took place that evening in a private sitting room at Kensington Palace. James was not present for the conversation, but he heard about it later from Lady Pemberton. According to her account, the Queen had been genuinely distraught, apologizing repeatedly for her son's behavior and for her own failure to recognize how his words might affect a young child. She had explained that Tom sometimes tried too hard to project authority or wisdom, especially around children, and that his comments about consequences and learning one's place had been meant as general life advice, not as threats. The prince had apparently been unmoved by these explanations. "With respect, ma'am," he had said, according to Lady Pemberton's retelling, "the intent behind Tom's words matters far less than the impact they had on my son. Louis is 5 years old. He should never have to parse whether a grown man's intimidating comments were meant as threats or just poor judgment. The result is the same frightened child who felt unsafe in his own home." The princess had been equally direct. "We appreciate your apology, and we understand that this situation is painful for you as a mother. But our priority has to be Louis's well-being. He will not be in situations where he might encounter Tom, not just at Christmas, but at any family gathering, until we are absolutely confident that..." Tom understands the impact of his words and has taken genuine steps to address his behavior around children. Queen Camilla had agreed to these terms, though reportedly with visible distress at the prospect of her son being excluded from family events. She had promised to have a serious conversation with Tom about his conduct and to insist that he undergo counseling to better understand appropriate interactions with children. When James learned of these developments, he felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that Prince Louis would not have to face his fear at Christmas. Satisfaction that the adults in positions of power were taking the situation seriously. But also lingering concern about what message was really being sent. Tom Parker Bowles would face no public consequences for his actions. His name would never be officially confirmed as the subject of the palace's vague statement. He would attend therapy privately, make promises privately, eventually be welcomed back into the family fold once enough time had passed and people had forgotten about the incident. Meanwhile, Prince Louis would carry the memory of being frightened by a man who faced no real accountability, who could use his connection to power to intimidate and then retreat behind family privacy when called out. What kind of lesson was that for a child to learn about justice and consequences? That night, as James finished his shift and prepared to go home to his own family, he found a small envelope that had been slipped under the door of the security office. Inside was a hand-drawn picture, clearly created by a child's hand. It showed a figure in a guard's uniform standing next to a much smaller figure with a crown. At the bottom, in careful, uneven letters, were the words, "Thank you for listening." From Louis. James stared at that simple drawing for a long time, feeling tears prick at his eyes once again. In the end, maybe that was what mattered most. Not the political maneuvering, or the carefully crafted statements, or the private family negotiations. Just one small boy who had been heard, who had been taken seriously, who had been shown that his feelings mattered. It wasn't perfect justice, but perhaps it was a start. 3 weeks had passed since that morning when Prince Louis had shared his fear with Officer James Mitchell. The palace had gradually returned to its normal rhythms. The media attention had faded as news stories captured public interest. And Christmas, at Sandringham, approached with its usual mixture of excitement and carefully orchestrated tradition. But for those directly involved in the incident, nothing felt quite the same. James had indeed been assigned as Prince Louis's primary security detail, a role that brought him into closer daily contact with the young prince. Over those 3 weeks, he had watched Louis slowly begin to relax again, the tension that had marked his small shoulders gradually easing. The boy laughed more freely, played with more abandon, and seemed to trust that the adults around him were truly looking out for his well-being. But James had also noticed the subtle changes in how Louis interacted with adults outside his immediate family. There was a new wariness there, a brief hesitation, before the boy would fully engage with someone he didn't know well. It broke James's heart to see that loss of innocence, that early lesson that not all grown-ups could be trusted simply by virtue of being grown-ups. The Princess of Wales had noticed it too. One afternoon, she had pulled James aside after he had walked Louis to his art lesson. "Officer Mitchell, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for Louis. Not just reporting what he told you, though. That was crucial. But for showing him that his feelings mattered, that he deserved to be heard and protected. That lesson may be the most important thing he takes away from this whole difficult experience. Has he talked about it much?" James had asked. The princess had shaken her head. "Not really. Dr. Chen has had a few sessions with him. It's helping him process what happened, but Louis seems more interested in moving forward than dwelling on the past. He did ask me once if Tom was angry with him. I assured him that any anger or disappointment people might feel about this situation should be directed at Tom, not at him. I hope he believed me." James had shared his own observation about Louis's newfound caution around unfamiliar adults. The princess had listened with that characteristic mix of steel and compassion that made her so effective in her role. "I've noticed that as well," she had said. "It's painful to see, but perhaps it's not entirely a bad thing. Louis is learning appropriate boundaries, learning that he has the right to feel comfortable and safe. Those lessons will serve him well throughout his life, even if the way he learned them was far from ideal." The investigation that Lady Pemberton had quietly conducted among palace staff had yielded disturbing results. 3 different staff members had come forward with their own stories of uncomfortable interactions with Tom Parker Bowles over the years. None rose to the level of harassment or abuse, but all followed a similar pattern, Tom making comments about hierarchy, about people knowing their place, about the importance of showing proper deference to those with royal connections. With staff members, these comments had been annoying but dismissible. With a 5-year-old child, they'd been frightening and traumatic. Armed with this pattern of behavior, the king had had a frank conversation with Queen Camilla about her son. According to palace sources, it had not gone well initially. The queen had been defensive, hurt that her family was being scrutinized and criticized. But when presented with multiple accounts spanning years, all describing the same essential character trait in Tama, need to assert dominance through his family connection, she had finally acknowledged that there was a problem that needed addressing. Tom Parker Bowles himself had been summoned to Clarence House for a meeting with his mother and stepfather. James had not been privy to the details of that conversation, but word around the palace was that the king had been brutally honest about how Tom's behavior reflected on the family, and on his mother's position, as Queen. Tom had reportedly been shocked that anyone had taken his comments to Prince Louis so seriously, describing them as just trying to teach the boy some life lessons about responsibility and behavior. That, the king had apparently replied, is precisely the problem. You are not Louis's parent or guardian. You are not his teacher. You have no authority over him whatsoever, and your attempt to assert such authority was inappropriate and harmful. The fact that you cannot see why a 5-year-old child would be frightened by a grown man telling him there would be consequences if he did not behave properly demonstrates a troubling lack of awareness about your impact on others. Tom had agreed to undergo counseling, though whether this was genuine recognition of a problem or simply compliance to satisfy his mother and stepfather remained unclear. He would not be attending Christmas at Sandringham, and his future inclusion in royal family events would be conditional on demonstrating changed behavior over time. As Christmas approached, James found himself thinking often about accountability and consequences. In his years of military and security service, he had operated in a world of clear rules and immediate repercussions. Break protocol, face discipline. Endanger someone, face charges. But in the rarefied world of the royal family, consequences were more nuanced, more private, more concerned with maintaining family harmony and public image than with delivering clear justice. Was this the right approach? James honestly didn't know. He understood the arguments for discretion, for handling family matters internally, for protecting the institution of the monarchy from scandal. But he also thought about all the other children who might encounter adults like Tom Parker, Bowles people, who used their positions or connections to intimidate, who confused asserting authority with offering guidance, who left children feeling small and frightened in the name of teaching them lessons. If such people never faced public accountability, never experienced real consequences for their behavior, would they truly change? Or would they simply become more careful about who witnessed their words, more strategic about when and where they chose to assert their problematic version of authority? These questions weighed on James's mind as he stood at his post outside the nursery on the morning of December 20th. 5 days before Christmas, the Wales family would be leaving for Sandringham that afternoon, and the palace was alive with the organized chaos of packing, planning, and preparing for the royal family's holiday gathering. Prince Louis bounded out of the nursery with his characteristic energy. But when he saw James, he slowed and approached more thoughtfully. Over the past 3 weeks, a genuine bond had formed between the guard and the young prince. Built on that foundation of trust established when Louis had first shared his fear. "Officer Mitchell," Louis said, using the formal address he reserved for serious moments, "I wanted to ask you something before we go to Sandringham. Of course, Your Royal Highness." "What's on your mind?" Louis bit his lip, that telltale gesture of uncertainty. "Mummy said Tom won't be at Christmas. But what about after? Will I have to see him again someday?" James knelt down, no longer concerned about breaking protocol with this gesture that had become natural between them. "I don't know what the future holds, Louis, But I can promise you this, before you ever have to be in the same room with Tom Parker Bowles again. The adults who love you and protect you will make absolutely certain that you feel safe. And if you ever don't feel safe for any reason, you know now that you can speak up. You have that power. You showed us that. It was scary to tell you, Louis admitted quietly. I thought maybe people would be mad at me. I know it was scary. That's what made it so brave. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing, even when you are scared. You did the right thing, Louis. You protected yourself by asking for help.
Oh.
And in doing so, you might have protected other children too. That's something to be proud of. Louis seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded slowly. Will you be at Sandringham? For Christmas? James smiled. I will be. Part of the security team will rotate through during the holiday, and I'll be there for several days. You probably won't see much of me. I'll be doing my job in the background, but I'll be there. Good, Louis said simply. Then, with the quick, emotional pivot of childhood, his expression brightened. Did you know there's going to be a huge Christmas tree? And Cook is making special gingerbread houses that we get to decorate. Charlotte says we can make them into a whole village. As Louis chattered excitedly about the upcoming festivities, James felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with his professional duties. This was what they had fought for, this return to childhood joy. This ability to be excited about gingerbread houses and Christmas trees without the shadow of fear darkening the celebration. Later that day, as James stood in the palace courtyard watching the royal convoy prepare to depart for Sandringham, Lady Pemberton approached him once more. Officer Mitchell, I've been asked to inform you that the Prince and Princess of Wales have submitted a commendation for your record. They want it noted formally that your handling of Prince Louis's disclosure was exemplary, and that your advocacy for the child's well-being went above and beyond normal duty expectations. James felt a flush of emotion. That's very kind of them, ma'am, but I was just doing my job. No, Lady Pemberton said firmly. You were doing much more than your job. Your job is to prevent physical threats to the royal family. What you did was protect a child's emotional well-being, his sense of safety and trust. You risked professional awkwardness and social discomfort to make sure his voice was heard. Not everyone would have done that, especially not in a situation involving the Queen's son. You should be proud of that. As the convoy pulled away, James caught a glimpse of Prince Louis's face pressed against the car window, waving enthusiastically. James waved back, feeling that familiar tightness in his chest that he now recognized as deep caring for the children he had sworn to protect. Christmas at Sandringham proceeded without incident. James rotated through his security shifts, maintaining his professional vigilance while also keeping a discreet eye on Prince Louis's demeanor and comfort level. The boy seemed genuinely happy, fully engaged in the holiday celebrations with his siblings and cousins. There were moments when James observed Louis staying closer to his parents than he might have in the past, but this seemed more like normal attachment than fear-driven clinging. On Christmas morning, as the family attended the traditional church service at St. Mary Magdalene, James stood with the other security personnel outside the church. Watching the crowds of well-wishers who had gathered to catch a glimpse of the royal family, among those crowds were undoubtedly people who had read or heard something about the vague incident at the palace weeks earlier, who had speculated and theorized about what had really happened. But the official silence had been maintained, protecting Prince Louis's privacy and allowing him to simply be a child enjoying Christmas rather than a subject of public scrutiny. Was this the right balance? James still wrestled with that question. The journalist in him understood the public's right to know when those in positions of power or proximity to power behaved inappropriately. But the protector in him, the father in him, understood the need to shield a child from becoming a tabloid headline, from having his worst moment of fear dissected and debated by millions of strangers. Perhaps there was no perfect answer, no solution that satisfied every principle and value. Perhaps all they could do was make the best choices available in an imperfect situation, prioritizing the vulnerable and hoping that the message sent was clear enough that children's feelings mattered, that speaking up was valued, that power did not excuse poor behavior. On his final shift at Sandringham before his Christmas break, James was doing a routine patrol of the grounds when he heard someone calling his name. He turned to find Prince Louis running toward him across the frost-touched lawn, his breath misting in the cold December air. The boy's nanny was following at a more sedate pace, calling for him to slow down and be careful. Louis reached James and had to bend over for a moment, catching his breath from his sprint. When he straightened up, his cheeks were flushed and his eyes were bright with excitement. "I wanted to give you this before you left," he said, thrusting a small wrapped package toward James. James accepted it carefully, surprised and touched by the gesture. "Your Royal Highness, you didn't need to get me anything." "I wanted to," Louis insisted, "for being my friend. Mummy helped me pick it out." Under the watchful eye of the nanny, James carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a simple silver keychain with an engraved medallion. On one side was the royal cipher of the Prince and Princess of Wales. On the other side were engraved the words, "For Officer Mitchell, a true guardian." From Louis. James felt his eyes burn with tears for the third time since this entire situation had begun. He looked at the young prince standing before him, the small person who had taught him so much about courage and vulnerability and the importance of truly listening when someone trusts you with their fear. "Thank you, Louis," James managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "This means more to me than you know. I'll treasure it always." Louis smiled, that beautiful, unguarded smile of a child who felt safe and valued. "Merry Christmas, Officer Mitchell." "Merry Christmas, Your Royal Highness." As James watched Louis run back toward the house, the boy's laughter floating back on the winter air, he thought about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The fear and the tears, the difficult conversations, and the imperfect resolutions. The questions about accountability and the struggle to balance discretion with justice. In the end, what mattered most was right there in front of him, a child who had been frightened finding his way back to joy. A child who had spoken up and been heard. A child who knew now that his feelings mattered and that there were adults willing to fight for his well-being. It wasn't perfect justice. It wasn't complete accountability. But it was something real and meaningful. One small victory in the ongoing struggle to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful to account. Even when that accountability had to happen in quiet, private ways rather than public declarations. James slipped the keychain into his pocket, feeling its weight as a reminder of responsibility and trust. As a royal guard, he had been trained to prevent physical threats, to put his body between danger and those he protected. But this experience had taught him that protection took many forms, and sometimes the most important thing a guardian could do was simply listen, believe, and refuse to let a child's voice be dismissed or ignored. That lesson, James thought as he completed his patrol and prepared to leave Sandringham for his own family Christmas, was one he would carry with him for the rest of his career and beyond. And perhaps, in its own quiet way, it would ripple outward, influencing how others approach their duties to protect and serve the most vulnerable among them. The story of Prince Louis's fear and Officer James Mitchell's breakdown would never be told in full to the public. It would remain a private chapter in the life of the royal family, known only to those directly involved. But its impact would last far longer than any headline or scandal in a child who learned to trust his own voice, in a guard who learned the true meaning of protection, and in a family that learned that sometimes the hardest conversations and most uncomfortable confrontations are also the most necessary. As James drove away from Sandringham that afternoon, the winter sun setting early over the Norfolk countryside, he touched the keychain in his pocket one more time. Whatever uncertainties remained about how the situation with Tom Parker Bowles would ultimately be resolved, one thing was absolutely certain: Prince Louis had been heard, his fear had been validated, and he had been shown that there were people willing to fight for him when he needed them. In the end, James thought, that was what it meant to be a true guardian. Not just standing watch against external threats, but creating a space where those you protected felt safe enough to voice their fears, confident that those fears would be taken seriously and met with action. It was a lesson he would never forget, a responsibility he would carry with him always, and a gift that one small prince had given him on a cold December morning when he had been brave enough to say, "I'm scared,"